Montana Territory, 1883. The dusty wind whipped across the streets of Copper Ridge, a fledgling town perched on the edge of civilization where fortunes were made and broken on the promise of cattle, gold, and new beginnings. 20-year-old Clara Adams stood at her bedroom window, watching tumbleweeds dance across the barren street, while her younger sister prepared for the most important day of their family's life. "Clara, come help me with these buttons," Catherine pleaded, struggling with the elaborate wedding gown their mother had painstakingly sewn over the past 3 months. "Mother will have a conniption if I appear disheveled when the Osborne family arrives." Clara turned from the window, her long honey-blonde hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. Unlike her sister's carefully arranged updo, Clara had barely bothered with her appearance today. What was the point? Everyone knew which Adams' daughter had been chosen, and it certainly wasn't the plain-spoken older sister who preferred riding horses to hosting tea. "The West isn't kind to dreamers," their father had told Clara countless times. "Pretty faces and soft hearts get broken out here. Best learn to be practical." Clara had absorbed that lesson thoroughly, building walls around her heart as solid as any frontier fort. In a land where survival depended on grit and practicality, romantic notions were dangerous luxuries. She'd convinced herself that her destiny was to remain her parents' steadfast helper, eventually becoming the maiden aunt to Catherine's future children. Love, Clara believed, was a privilege reserved for those with Catherine's delicate beauty and graceful manner. She crossed the room and fastened Catherine's buttons with practiced efficiency. "You look beautiful," Clara said, meaning it. At 18, Catherine was everything Clara was not: petite where Clara stood tall, demure where Clara spoke her mind, compliant where Clara questioned. "Do you think he'll be pleased?" Catherine whispered, her eyes wide with anxiety. Clara squeezed her sister's shoulders. "Any man would be fortunate to have you." Their mother burst into the room, fanning herself frantically. "They're here, the entire Osborne family, and they've brought their ranch hands too. Come downstairs, Catherine, but not too eagerly. Clara, fix your hair and change into the blue dress. We need to make a proper impression." The Osbornes were cattle royalty in the territory, and the arranged marriage between Catherine and the eldest Osborne son would secure the Adams family's precarious financial position. It was a business transaction wrapped in wedding lace, as practical as any frontier agreement. Clara changed dutifully, pinning her rebellious hair into a more acceptable arrangement, though several strands escaped immediately. The blue calico dress was presentable but simple compared to Catherine's bridal finery. She wasn't part of the negotiation, merely set dressing for the family tableau. Downstairs, the parlor buzzed with conversation. Mr. Osborne, a robust man with a silver-streaked beard, was deep in discussion with Clara's father about cattle prices and grazing rights. His wife, adorned in Eastern fineries that seemed out of place in the territory, was eyeing the Adams home with poorly disguised assessment. But it was the young man standing by the window who caught Clara's attention, not William Osborne, Catherine's intended, but another figure Clara had never seen before. He stood apart from the family gathering, tall and lean in a well-worn denim jacket, his posture suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. Even from the staircase, Clara could see the strong line of his jaw, the sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, and the way he studied the room with quiet intensity. "That's Jackson O'Malley," Mrs. Adams whispered as she passed Clara on the stairs. "The Osborne's head wrangler. Barely 24 and already manages their entire northern herd. But remember your place, Clara. He's here as an employee, nothing more." Clara nodded, though something about the warning rankled, as if she needed reminding of her place in this carefully orchestrated performance. The formal introductions proceeded with excruciating propriety. William Osborne, 35 and twice widowed, bowed over Catherine's hand while their mothers exchanged satisfied glances. The man was handsome enough in a weather-beaten way, but the calculating assessment in his eyes as he inventoried Catherine made Clara's skin crawl. "And this is our eldest, Clara," Mr. Adams said as an afterthought, gesturing toward her. William Osborne barely glanced in her direction, but as the group moved toward the dining room for the celebration meal, Clara felt someone else's gaze. Jackson O'Malley had turned from the window and was looking directly at her, his blue eyes startlingly intense against his sun-darkened skin. For one suspended moment, their eyes held. Then, unbelievably, he walked directly toward her, bypassing Catherine and the entire wedding party. "Miss Adams," he said, his voice low and unexpectedly gentle. "I believe this is meant for you." He extended his hand, offering a small leather-bound journal. Clara recognized it immediately, her sketching book that she carried on her solitary rides. It must have fallen from her saddlebag during yesterday's excursion. "I found it by Cottonwood Creek," he explained. "Your name was inside. I thought you might want it back before the rain ruined your drawings." Clara accepted the journal, acutely aware of the calluses on his fingers as they briefly brushed hers. "You looked at my sketches?" she asked, uncertain whether to feel grateful or invaded. A slight smile softened his features. "Only enough to find your name. But what I saw was remarkable. You see this land differently than most." Before she could respond, Mrs. Osborne called sharply from the dining room doorway. "Mr. O'Malley, you're needed to discuss the north pasture with my husband." Jackson nodded respectfully to Clara. "Miss Adams," he said, then added in a lower voice, "the one who sees what others don't." With that cryptic statement, he joined the others, leaving Clara frozen in place, clutching her journal and wondering how a simple interaction with a ranch hand could unsettle her so completely. The engagement dinner proceeded with excruciating formality. William discussed Catherine as though she were a prized heifer, praising her delicate features and gentle demeanor. The families negotiated dowry details with thinly veiled eagerness. Through it all, Clara sat silently, her usual outspoken nature subdued by the weight of family expectations. Only once did she catch Jackson's eye across the table. While the others discussed Catherine's future household duties, Jackson raised an eyebrow slightly at a particularly archaic pronouncement from William. That tiny gesture of shared understanding felt like finding an unexpected ally in enemy territory. As coffee was served, Mr. Osborne announced, "We're driving 3,000 head to the railhead next week." William thought it would be fitting for Miss Catherine to join us for part of the journey, to see her future husband in his element. Clara's father frowned. "I'm not sure that's appropriate before the wedding. Both daughters could come," Mrs. Osborne interjected smoothly. "With proper chaperones, of course. It would give Catherine a taste of her future life, and—" She hesitated, glancing at Clara with calculated assessment. "Perhaps introduce Miss Clara to some of the eligible ranchers along the way." The implication was clear. With one daughter advantageously placed, it was time to find a match for the spare. Clara kept her expression neutral, though inwardly she recoiled at being displayed like merchandise. "Jackson will ensure their safety," Mr. Osborne added casually. "He knows that country better than anyone." Clara glanced up to find Jackson watching her, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. The intensity of his gaze sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, challenging everything she thought she understood about her place in this frontier world. 3 days later, Clara found herself atop her favorite mare, riding alongside the massive cattle drive as it wound through the golden Montana grasslands. Catherine traveled in relative comfort in the cook wagon, where Mrs. Osborne had insisted she remain to protect her complexion. But Clara had refused such coddling, preferring to ride and observe the operation firsthand. "You'll ruin your marriage prospects getting so brown in this sun," her mother had warned before they departed. Clara had simply smiled. "Then I'll match the landscape I love." Now, as the afternoon sun warmed her shoulders, Clara felt more alive than she had in months. The endless sky stretched above her, the rippling grasslands extended to the horizon, and for the first time in years, she wasn't constrained by the suffocating expectations of Copper Ridge society. "You ride well for a town girl," came a voice beside her. Jackson O'Malley guided his chestnut gelding alongside her mare, his ease in the saddle speaking to years spent on horseback. "I'm not a town girl," Clara replied. "I was born in a wagon on the Oregon Trail. This country is in my blood, Mr. O'Malley, even if my mother pretends otherwise." His smile transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Call me Jackson, and I should have known. You sit that saddle like you were born to it. My father taught me before he decided ladies shouldn't ride astride," Clara said, then immediately regretted revealing such a personal detail. Jackson didn't comment on her disclosure. Instead, he gestured toward the horizon. "See that line of cottonwoods? There's a spring there that never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. I thought you might want to sketch it while the light's good." Clara looked at him in surprise. You remembered my sketches? Hard to forget something that captures the soul of this country so truly, he replied simply. Then, as if embarrassed by his candor, he added, the herd will be bedding down nearby. I can escort you there if you'd like. Something in his offer felt significant, not merely a courtesy, but an invitation to step outside the narrow path that had been laid before her. I'd like that very much, Clara said. They rode in companionable silence, maintaining a proper distance that nevertheless felt intimate in the vastness of the plains. As they approached the cottonwoods, Clara gasped. The spring formed a small, clear pool surrounded by wildflowers, with the golden afternoon light filtering through the leaves to create patterns on the water's surface. It's beautiful, she breathed, already mentally mixing the colors she would need to capture this scene. Jackson helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Beauty that most pass by without seeing, he said quietly. Like some people. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning neither dared to fully acknowledge. Clara busied herself with retrieving her sketchbook, hyper-aware of his presence as he tethered their horses in the shade. May I watch you work? He asked, maintaining a respectful distance. Clara nodded, settling on a sun-warmed rock. As her charcoal began to move across the paper, capturing the interplay of light and shadow, she gradually forgot to be self-conscious. Jackson sat silently, occasionally shifting position but never interrupting her concentration. I've never met anyone who sees the land the way you do, he said finally, as she was adding the last touches to her sketch. Most people out here only see what they can take from it: grass for cattle, gold in streams, timber for building. You see what it already is. Clara looked up, startled by the perception in his observation. My father says that's my problem. Head in the clouds, impractical to the core. Is that what you believe? Jackson asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. The question struck her with unexpected force. Did she believe that? Had she accepted her father's assessment of her worth, measuring herself against practical standards that never accounted for the richness of her inner life? I used to think practicality was the only virtue that mattered out here, she admitted. That dreamers and artists were luxuries the frontier couldn't afford. And now, Clara looked down at her sketch, then back at the landscape before her. Now I'm not so sure. What's the point of surviving if we can't see the beauty around us? If we can't create something that matters? Jackson's smile was slow and warm. That's what I've been trying to figure out myself. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they reluctantly returned to camp. The cattle drive had settled for the night, cowboys moving among the herd with practiced efficiency while the cook prepared dinner over an open fire. Catherine rushed to meet Clara as she dismounted. Where have you been? William has been asking for you. Clara frowned. For me? Why would William want me? Something about land surveys, Catherine said dismissively. But Mother is furious that you disappeared with Mr. O'Malley without a chaperone. Clara glanced over her shoulder at Jackson, who was already leading their horses away. He caught her eye briefly, touching the brim of his hat in silent acknowledgement before turning toward the remuda. The incident created exactly the ripple of scandal Clara's mother had feared. That evening, as they ate around the campfire, Mrs. Osborne made pointed remarks about proper behavior on the frontier, while William watched Clara with newfound interest that made her skin crawl. Your sister tells me you have a head for figures, William said, cornering Clara as she finished her coffee. I could use someone with that talent to help manage the ranch accounts. Catherine is excellent with numbers as well, Clara deflected, uncomfortable with his sudden attention. William waved a dismissive hand. A wife has other duties, but a sister-in-law with useful skills would be a valuable addition to the household. The implication was clear. Clara would be expected to join their household as an unpaid laborer, simultaneously chaperone, accountant, and childcare provider. The walls of her future suddenly seemed to contract even further, from maiden aunt in her parents' home to servant in her sister's. I haven't decided my future plans, Clara said carefully. William's smile didn't reach his eyes. Families should stay together on the frontier, Miss Adams. It's the practical approach. Practical. Always practical. Never what brought joy or meaning, only what ensured survival and financial stability. That night, unable to sleep in the cramped wagon she shared with Catherine, Clara slipped out to sit by the dying embers of the campfire. The night was cool, the sky ablaze with stars more numerous than she could ever capture on paper. Couldn't sleep? Jackson's voice came quietly from the darkness. Clara startled, but didn't flee as propriety demanded. Too many thoughts, she admitted as he settled on a log nearby, careful to maintain a respectable distance. About William's offer? At her surprised look, he added, camp gossip travels faster than prairie fire. Clara sighed. Is it wrong to want more than practicality? Than security? Jackson was silent for a long moment, poking at the embers with a stick. My father died when I was 15, he said finally. Caught in a blizzard while trying to save our neighbor's cattle. Died being practical, doing what was expected. My mother followed 6 months later, worked herself to death, trying to keep our small ranch going. He looked up at the stars. I sold everything, took what skills I had, and decided I'd live differently. I'd find joy where I could, see beauty even in harsh places. Some call it impractical. I call it the only way to truly live. The quiet conviction in his voice resonated with something deep in Clara's soul, a truth she'd always known but never dared articulate. How do you find that courage? To choose your own path when everyone says you're wrong. By remembering that fear is a poor compass, Jackson said, and by recognizing when something matters enough to risk everything else. Their eyes met across the dying fire, and in that moment, Clara felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of herself and her place in this vast, unforgiving landscape. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one not dictated by family obligation or frontier practicality, but shaped by her own desires and dreams. The remaining days of the cattle drive passed in a blur of dust, activity, and stolen conversations. Clara found herself riding beside Jackson whenever possible, drawn to his quiet observations and unexpected depth. He told her about the northern territories where he'd worked, described mountain meadows bursting with wildflowers that she ached to see and sketch. She showed him more of her drawings, encouraged by his genuine appreciation. They were careful to maintain propriety, always in sight of others, never touching beyond the most necessary assistance. But something was growing between them, undeniable as the changing seasons, powerful as the rivers that carved the landscape. Catherine, preoccupied with her upcoming marriage and the trials of frontier travel, seemed oblivious to the connection forming between her sister and the cowboy. But others noticed. Mrs. Osborne watched with narrowed eyes whenever Clara and Jackson spoke. William's attention to Clara increased, his offers of employment becoming more insistent. 1 week into the journey, disaster struck. A sudden summer storm rolled across the plains without warning, bringing lightning that spooked the cattle into a stampede. Chaos erupted as cowboys raced to control the panicked herd. Clara, who had been riding near the chuck wagon, saw Catherine thrown to the ground as the wagon driver struggled with frightened horses. Without hesitation, she galloped toward her sister, dismounting in one fluid motion to pull Catherine away from the wagon's careening wheels. Are you hurt? Clara demanded, checking her sister for injuries. Catherine clutched her ankle, tears streaking the dust on her face. I think it's broken, she sobbed. Above the chaos, Clara heard Jackson shouting orders, working to turn the stampeding herd. The danger was far from over, with cattle still running dangerously close to their position. We need to move, Clara said, helping Catherine to her feet. But her sister collapsed with a cry of pain as soon as she put weight on her injured ankle. Without warning, a group of steers broke away from the main herd, charging directly toward them. Clara positioned herself between the animals and Catherine, knowing it was futile but unable to abandon her sister. Then Jackson was there, his horse sliding to a stop between them and the oncoming cattle. He fired his revolver into the air repeatedly, the sharp reports diverting the steers just enough to thunder past them rather than over them. In the aftermath, as the camp regrouped and the doctor examined Catherine's injury, William's reaction revealed his true character. Rather than concern for his fiancée's pain, he complained about the delay to their journey and the potential financial impact of the stampede. Perhaps this is a sign we should reconsider this arrangement, Clara's father said that evening, his patience clearly tested by William's behavior. Nonsense, William replied coldly. A contract is a contract. Miss Catherine will simply need to learn that ranch life involves hardship. Jackson, who had been conferring with the trail boss nearby, stiffened visibly at William's callous words. His eyes met Clara's across the camp, and in that moment, She saw a decision form in his expression. Later that night, as Clara sat beside Catherine's wagon, keeping watch over her sleeping sister, Jackson approached quietly. "How is she?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Resting now. The doctor says it's a bad sprain, not broken. She'll recover, but she can't travel like this." Jackson nodded, then said carefully, "William plans to continue to the railhead tomorrow. He wants to leave Catherine at the next settlement to recover while he completes the cattle sale." Clara's shock must have shown on her face. "I know," Jackson said grimly. "He also mentioned that you should continue with the drive to help with the accounting. Separate me from my injured sister? That's outrageous." Clara hissed, mindful of Catherine sleeping nearby. Jackson hesitated, then sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "There's something you should know about William Osborne," he said quietly. "His first wife died in childbirth. The second reportedly fell from a horse, though there were whispers of other causes." "What are you saying?" Clara asked, though a cold dread was already forming in her stomach. "I'm saying that William Osborne sees women as property, not partners. And I've watched him watching you this week. He's decided he wants both Adams sisters, Catherine as his wife, you as." He trailed off, unwilling to voice the implication. Clara's mind raced. If what Jackson suggested was true, Catherine was in terrible danger. But who would believe accusations against the territory's wealthiest rancher, especially from a hired hand and an unmarried woman? "There's a settlement 3 days' ride north of here," Jackson said, his voice low and urgent. "A friend of mine has a small ranch there. It would be a safe place for you and Catherine to recover while your father is notified." "You're suggesting we flee in the night?" Clara asked, both shocked and strangely exhilarated by the idea. Jackson's blue eyes were steady on hers. "I'm suggesting I help you protect your sister. And yourself." In that moment, Clara saw the crossroads before her with perfect clarity. The safe path was to stay, to endure whatever scheme William had planned, to sacrifice herself on the altar of family obligation. The dangerous path was to trust this man she barely knew, to seize control of her fate and her sister's. "When?" she asked simply. 2 hours before dawn. I'll have horses ready behind the supply wagon." Clara looked at her sleeping sister, then back at Jackson. "Why are you risking your position to help us?" His expression softened. "Because some things matter more than safety or security. Some people are worth risking everything for." He left before she could respond, disappearing into the darkness with the silent efficiency of a man accustomed to moving unnoticed when necessary. The escape went both better and worse than planned. Better because they managed to leave without raising an alarm, Jackson leading them through the darkness with confident precision. Worse because the trail north proved more difficult than expected, with Catherine's injury slowing their progress considerably. By midday, Clara knew they were being pursued. Jackson didn't say it aloud, but she saw it in the way he constantly checked their back trail, in his increasing urgency to push forward despite Catherine's discomfort. "William will never forgive this insult," Catherine said tearfully as they paused to rest the horses near a shallow creek. "Even if what you say about him is true, running away only confirms our guilt in his eyes." "We're not guilty of anything," Clara insisted, helping her sister drink from a canteen. "And I'd rather face his anger than leave you unprotected with a man who sees you as property." Jackson returned from scouting ahead, his expression grim. "Riders coming from the south. 6, maybe 7. Moving fast." Clara's heart sank. "William's men." Jackson nodded. "We can't outrun them with an injured rider. Not without killing the horses." He looked around the small clearing, assessing their options with the experienced eye of a man who had faced danger before. "There's a narrow canyon about a mile ahead. Defensible. We might stand a chance there." "Against 7 armed men?" Clara asked incredulously. Jackson met her gaze squarely. "I won't let them take you back." The simple declaration held a wealth of meaning neither had time to explore. With renewed urgency, they continued north, reaching the canyon entrance just as their pursuers appeared on the horizon behind them. The next hours passed in a blur of tension and desperate preparation. Jackson positioned them in a natural stone alcove partway up the canyon wall, where a spring provided water and fallen boulders offered cover. He distributed spare ammunition from his saddlebags, showing Clara how to reload his spare revolver while he took position with his rifle. "I'm sorry I brought this danger to you," Clara said quietly, as they waited for the inevitable confrontation. Jackson's smile was surprisingly gentle, given the circumstances. I chose this path with my eyes open, Clara, just as you did. I always thought the frontier left no room for choices. Only survival, she admitted. That dreams and desires were luxuries we couldn't afford. And now, Clara looked at this man who had risked everything to help her and her sister, who saw beauty in harsh places and courage in quiet moments. Now I think perhaps those dreams are what make survival worthwhile. The sound of approaching horses ended their conversation. William Osborne's voice echoed up from the canyon floor, demanding their surrender. "Send down the women, O'Malley, and we might let you live," William shouted. "This is between me and my property." Jackson's jaw tightened. He called back. "Miss Catherine has decided to reconsider your arrangement, Mr. Osborne. I suggest you do the same and return to your cattle." A rifle shot cracked in response, the bullet splintering rock near their position. Catherine whimpered in fear, but Clara felt an unexpected calm descend over her. Whatever happened now, she had chosen this path freely, not out of obligation or practicality, but from her own moral conviction. "Stay down," Jackson instructed them, then began returning fire with measured precision, not aiming to kill, but to keep their attackers at bay. For nearly an hour, the standoff continued. Then William, apparently losing patience, ordered a direct assault on their position. 3 men began climbing toward them, using the canyon walls for cover as they advanced. "I can't hold them all off," Jackson said grimly, reloading his rifle with his last cartridges. Clara raised the revolver he had given her, her hands surprisingly steady. "Then we fight together." Their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. Whatever came next, they faced it as equals, partners in this desperate gamble for freedom. The first attacker appeared over the edge of their shelter, only to be met with Jackson's rifle butt to the head, sending him tumbling back down the slope. The second managed to fire a shot that grazed Jackson's arm before Clara's revolver barked, her bullet striking the man's shoulder and disabling him. But the third man got through, tackling Jackson to the ground. They grappled fiercely, too close for Clara to risk a shot. With a desperate surge of strength, Jackson threw his attacker aside, but not before the man's knife slashed across his ribs, drawing a bright line of blood. Clara fired at the man, driving him back, but the damage was done. Jackson pressed a hand to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "Go," he gasped. "Take Catherine and go. I'll hold them as long as I can." "I'm not leaving you," Clara said fiercely. Before Jackson could argue, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching echoed through the canyon. William shouted in alarm from below, and gunfire erupted, but not directed at their position. "Clara, Catherine," their father's voice carried up from the canyon floor. Incredibly, Mr. Adams had arrived with a posse from Copper Ridge, the sheriff, several ranchers, and a dozen armed men. They had surrounded William's men, who were now surrendering with raised hands. "How?" Clara breathed, helping Jackson to his feet. Despite his pain, Jackson managed a wry smile. "I sent a message with a passing rider before we left camp. Told your father everything. You planned for this possibility all along," Clara realized, supporting his weight as they carefully descended to meet their rescuers. "I hoped it wouldn't be necessary," Jackson admitted. "But I wasn't going to risk your safety on hope alone." The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. William Osborne, faced with witnesses to his actions and rumors of his previous wife's suspicious deaths now in the open, fled the territory rather than face justice. The cattle drive continued under new management, with the Osborne ranch falling to distant relatives back east. Clara's father, seeing his daughter's unwavering attention to the injured cowboy during their return journey to Copper Ridge, reluctantly acknowledged what was developing between them. "He's just a hired hand," he reminded Clara as they sat on the porch of their home a week after their return. "No land, no prospects." "He saved both your daughters from a terrible fate," Clara countered. "And he has prospects. The Larson property north of town is for sale, good grassland with water rights." Her father raised an eyebrow. "And how would a cowboy afford such a property?" "With a partner who believes in him," Clara said simply. "I have my inheritance from grandmother. It's not much, but enough for a start." "You can't be serious, Clara. A cattle ranch? That's no life for a woman raised as you've been." Clara looked out across the town to where the mountains rose in the distance. I was born in a wagon on the frontier, father. I've spent my life being told that dreams don't matter here, that only practical concerns count. But Jackson showed me something different, that seeing beauty in this harsh land isn't weakness. It's what makes life worth living. Her father was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he chuckled. You sound just like your mother when I met her. Stubborn as the day is long. Mother? But she's always insisted on propriety and practicality. Now, perhaps. But the woman I fell in love with insisted on bringing a piano across the Oregon Trail. Said a home needed music to be truly alive. He sighed heavily. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that. The frontier has a way of grinding down dreams until all that's left is survival. He looked at his daughter with new eyes. Maybe you and your cowboy have the right idea after all. Jackson recovered from his wounds slowly but steadily. During his convalescence, he and Clara spent hours together, proper, chaperoned hours filled with conversation, plans, and deepening connection. He spoke of cattle breeding techniques he'd studied, sustainable ranching methods that wouldn't deplete the land. She shared her dreams of capturing the territory's beauty in sketches that might someday be published back east. Together, they walked the Larson property, envisioning what it could become, not just a working ranch, but a true home filled with both practical industry and beautiful dreams. 3 months after the ill-fated cattle drive, Clara stood beside Jackson in the town's small church. Catherine watched from the front pew, her ankle fully healed and her expression one of genuine happiness for her sister. Their parents sat beside her, their father gruffly proud, their mother dabbing at unexpected tears. I take you, Clara Adams, as my wife, Jackson said, his voice steady and sure. Not because it's practical or safe, but because loving you has taught me what truly matters in this life. Clara smiled up at him, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. I take you, Jackson O'Malley, as my husband. You showed me that even on the harshest frontier, beauty and dreams aren't luxuries. They're necessities that make survival worthwhile. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Clara knew they faced many challenges ahead. The frontier remained unforgiving, the work of building a ranch exhausting. But they would face it together, partners in every sense, proving with each passing season that the strongest foundations were built not just on practical necessity, but on dreams shared and nurtured together. 1 year later, Clara sat on the porch of their ranch house, sketching the sunset over their growing herd of cattle. Jackson stepped out to join her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the evening chill. The Carlson sisters arrived from Chicago today, he said, settling beside her. They'll be teaching at the new schoolhouse in town. Clara smiled, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her growing belly. Did they seem overwhelmed by frontier life? A bit. Reminded me of you when I first saw you. Someone who sees both the harshness and the beauty of this place. Clara leaned against him, comfortable in the home they'd built together. I was thinking our child might need some picture books that show the real West, not just the dangers, but the wonder of it. Jackson's hand covered hers over their unborn child. I can't think of anyone better to create them. As darkness settled over their land, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had once believed the frontier left no room for dreams, that practical concerns were all that mattered in this unforgiving landscape. But in choosing Jackson, and in his choosing her, they had discovered a profound truth, that love itself was the most practical foundation for facing life's challenges, and that seeing beauty in harsh places wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength of all.